Hello, good afternoon. We have with us Carmen Jonhs. She was for over 21 years working for the UN. Mrs. Jonhs, can you please tell us how long you were in Western Sahara and in what capacity you were there?
Well, yes, thank you. I was a political affairs officer for 15 of those years, which are calendar years, by the way. Some at UN headquarters, but most in Western Sahara. MINURSO, which is the mission of the United Nations for the referendum in Western Sahara, had its headquarters in the Moroccan-controlled area of Western Sahara, which is Laayoune, or El Ayoun, as some people call it. And it has a liaison office in west southern Algeria, where the Sahrawi refugee camps are located. So MINURSO had a liaison office. So of course, the people, our people, MINURSO people, would liaison with Morocco, one of the parties to the conflict. And on the other side, we would liaise with the Frente Polisario, which is a movement fully recognized by the UN as representing the people of Western Sahara, that is, the native population of this huge territory, which was once the Spanish Sahara. You may recall that Spain abandoned its colony, which allowed both Morocco and Mauritania to invade it and claim it as their own. Morocco was the one who almost succeeded. Mauritania withdrew. So there is this 2/3 of the territory of Western Sahara, which is controlled by Morocco, but they are there illegally. They invaded very violently, and they have since occupied it and exploited its resources, etc.
Did you, when you went to Western Sahara, of course, you had to get knowledgeable about the conflict. And did you read the status, the legal status of Western Sahara? Were you aware of the legal status and what was proposed and what was said by the International Court and so on?
Yes, that's right. Well, as a UN political officer already and at UN headquarters, I had read our reports. And in fact, I applied to that mission because, for several reasons. I did want to get to know the Sahara Desert, but that's just me. The connection of the issue of Western Sahara, it's linked to international laws, definitely interested me. I'll just cite two things. The General Assembly in 1960 approved a resolution. They're not mandatory, but the General Assembly has the force of being approved by a majority of the countries in the world who are members of the UN. So that resolution made this principle of international law, which is called self-determination, and which basically explains what democracy is. Self-determination is when a nation, a people, a colony is allowed to express itself and to say whether do they want to become integral part of the colonial power or do they want independence. So that is the principle of self-determination, and the General Assembly made it into a right. This was 1960. You will recall that in 1960, there were still plenty of colonies left under France, under the UK, etc. And I'm referring basically to Africa. So that was pretty crucial. It meant that they had these peoples, including the people of Western Sahara, which I will refer to later on, not at this stage. They had the right to ask for a referendum to express that their will, what they want to be, part of the colonial administrator or independent. The second thing I would like to mention is the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. At some point, years later, 1975, if I'm not mistaken, yes, in the General Assembly, Morocco said, why don't we put all this problem to the International Court of Justice? This is public fact, of course. This is well known. Perhaps they thought they were going to win, but yes, the General Assembly agreed. And the question was put to the International Court as to as to what was the status of Western Sahara. It was still Spanish Sahara. The International Court of Justice, which, by the way, does have the role of advising certain organizations if they want to know the court's opinion. And as we know, the International Court of Justice is the highest court of the land, of the planet. You don't appeal what they say. Opinions are opinions, but it still is the International Court of Justice. So they asked this question, and by the way, what I was saying was that the International Court can give an advisory opinion to certain organizations, and at the top of the list is the UN General Assembly. So the UN General Assembly accepted this suggestion, and 10 months later it said, and I'm only going to quote basically one sentence that they said, which is the crucial one, that Morocco did not have the right to claim territorial sovereignty over this land, which they described as Western Sahara. It does not have that right. Of course, whatever the International Court of Justice says, A, it is crystal clear, and B, nobody said, oh, they're wrong, and C, of course, this is still valid today. So both of these things have to be explained when you tackle the historic issue of this land, which was almost for 100 years a colony of Spain, and which was inhabited for generations by many, many nomad tribes who consider it their land, their homeland, and who were loosely bound by a federation of the main tribes of here. And that's as far as I go, because I am not a historian. But yes, this information was crucial, because political affairs officers, by the way, we're the ones who write the reports under the guidance of our bosses, and we do briefings covering this terrain, covering what, in this case, MINURSO does, which is the mission I worked at, and UN principles, UN's position, which was based, by the way, on the court's decision, on the court's advisory opinion, as I said.
So going over to a more personal side, you lived in Western Sahara. Where did you live during the years that you were at MINURSO?
I was there more than 10 years, and I was quite happy to be there because I think the job was the most interesting I'd ever had. I started, of course, at headquarters, which is the city of Laayoune, the capital of Western Sahara, if you go back that far. So I was there as political affairs officer, but I went many times and finally spent about 5 years in Tindouf, which is Algeria, and which is surrounded by the 5 Sahrawi refugee camps. Why? Because when Morocco invaded to take over the land that Spain had, shall we say, gifted to the two neighboring countries, the Sahrawi population fled this army, which was very violent, and Algeria, which had already recognized the Frente Polisario, opened a tiny, tiny little space, less than 100 kilometers, so these refugees could walk through there. They all walked, by the way, and they established these camps, and there they are still. So I went to the refugee camps many, many times. So I've lived more or less in both, on both sides, going back and forth, and that includes 2 non-consecutive calendar years as head of our liaison office in Tindouf.
I'm going to ask you more about occupied territories than the one of the refugee camps. For one simple question, that's refugee camps are open to visitors, so we have much more information than on Moroccan-controlled area, as you know. So I would like to know your view, your opinion, and your experience in the occupied territories with the Sahrawi population. And mainly, we hear a lot that the Sahrawis are peacefully protesting, that have non-violent actions that show their disagreement with the Moroccan occupation, their refusal of the Moroccan occupation. As you lived for so many years in the area, what did you see firsthand? What was your experience in this field?
Well, as I said, I was there for 5, 6 years, something like that. I will not refer to my direct experience as a UN international civil staff. I am loyal to the UN and to its principles. However, I certainly can talk about my experience with the locals there. I saw many examples of very intelligent passive resistance to Moroccan authorities, whose job, it seems, was to repress any sign of independence there. The graffiti, for example, there's a lot of graffitis in the Sahrawi neighborhoods of El Laayoune, which are very, very poor. I've put a lot of them on Twitter. And you would see graffiti always drawing the Sahrawi the Polisario flag, which is the one they would use if they achieve independence. And it was quite, this is very personal opinion, it was quite comical because they would draw this flag everywhere. And at first, in my first years over there, the police would come and carefully paint over just the flag. So it made it even more visible because you could see at a distance, oh, a black rectangle, that is an independence flag from the Polisario. So eventually they realized this and they started scribbling on it. Well, you can easily read what it's on. You can see the flag as well. So finally they started throwing black paint at it, which of course made it quite dramatic as well. I mean, the side of a residential building, very humble brick walls, and you could see these splashes of black paint. So of course, they never thought of erasing them. That would have been a lot of work, but there they were still. A scholar whom I know and who has written one of the books on Western Sahara, there's no lack of books on Western Sahara. It's an extremely interesting situation historically. There's one on the history itself, on the war, by the way, Morocco and Polisario, which lasted 16 years. Not a high intensity war, but it did last that long. And there's lots on human rights issues since then. So this was told to me by a scholar who I asked him, when did this happen? 2006, I was there. I seem to remember one example. The local population, in an ingenious demonstration of resistance, made small flags, cloth flags of, again, the Polisario flag for the independent state, which they were pursuing. That is called, by the way, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, okay? So they would make these cloth flags. They had caught a lot of feral cats, yes, cats, and they sort of tied these flags on the cats and then let them loose again. So there were a lot of cats going around Layun, obviously Polisario cats, you know, with the flag attached to their backs. And so the police had this dilemma. Either we chase the cats or we let them go free. Now you can imagine the dilemma, the very funny situation of watching one or two policemen run after a feral cat with the flag of Polisario. So, I mean, this is ingenious. It's funny and it works because of course they could not do that. It would have been a little bit humiliating to run after a cat. So that's one thing. But again, I'm not betraying anything because this is not part of the reports, and I barely remember it, and I thought probably it was just one cat, but it was a lot of cats. So that's one way of resistance. The other, of course, is the graffiti, which always called for the independence of Morocco. I'm thinking of that because once, instead of the graffiti on a wall with the Sahrawi, the Polisario flag, somebody drew a Moroccan flag next to it and left them both there, which is why I was thinking of Morocco. But of course, the graffiti is pro-independence. They once defaced a billboard with the king's image on there. There were lots of billboards, and Moroccan authorities, administrators, would put the king's face on them. Huge, huge billboards. They once defaced that. I didn't see it, but they removed not the billboard itself, but the king's image, etc. Any notion of a desire for independence was repressed one way or the other.
So when you say repressed, I know that you had some first-hand experience from your apartment one day, and you sent us a picture that I will put on now on the screen. Could you explain what happened at this during?
That is a close-up, and I am not at all sure. There you go. There you can see. It's still a close-up, but you can see exactly what I was seeing. I think you may have explained already what Gedein Izik was. This was started in October 2010. It was a massive, peaceful demonstration on the outskirts of the city of Layun, maybe 14 kilometers. As the Sahrawis, of course, know their desert, they were able to go there, set up hundreds of white tents very close to each other. You know, it's not like they were living there, as a protest. And eventually, very eventually, weeks later, Local Moroccan authorities realized this, and this picture was taken the same day when they went in and destroyed the camp. And the people who were there, who were not living there necessarily, had to walk back to Laayoune. So there were riots the whole day. I was at home. This was taken from my apartment. I took it, of course. I took lots of pictures. I'm a former reporter in Chile. That's where my family's come. And as a reporter, I had covered many demonstrations under the Pinochet years. So obviously I took pictures because I was told to stay there all day because it could have been dangerous. This shows a house belonging to a Sahrawi family. The main entrance was around the corner. It occupied the whole corner there. It shows many of these young Moroccan thugs, really. You can see one of them on the left with a long white metal stick. The other one has a stone on his hand. And what are they trying to do is to assault. They are assaulting that house. The metal door is, well, you cannot bring it down with even with a metallic stick. But the main point here is that they were not only fully supported by the two Moroccan police, you can see behind them, in green with white helmets. You can easily see the one in the middle with a stone in his hand. Not only was he allowing this assault to take place against a house, he was going to throw the stone himself. Please note, this is Moroccan police helping thugs assault a house for no other reason except that they wanted to harass the people within. As I was there the whole day, I saw what happened to this particular incident. These two, or maybe two other young Moroccans, were unable, as I said, to break down the door, but there is a small window to the side, and they were able to pry open the bars on that window. So one of them actually, they pried open the bars, and one of them went in. And of course, as I was there the whole day, after maybe 20 minutes, this person who had burglarized the home when they were still in there, the inhabitants, and he came out with what he had stolen, which was a tray, like the one you serve couscous on or whatever, and a new blanket still in one of those big bags that you sell the blankets in. This is the poor robbing the poor. I mean, it's amazing. The photograph you just showed for a moment there is police surveillance, constant surveillance outside the house on activists. They don't move, they stay there. There's another photograph which shows a man in civilian just walking next to them. From my experience, and again, this is my personal experience, one-to-one, not part of my job directly. I'm not saying anything confidential about either the UN or MINURSO, but from my experience, I can tell this is an informer or a plainclothes policeman, because they would never have let a civilian, much less a Sahrawi, walk so close between the police and the house. The metal door there is from the house of this person.
So you talked and confirmed to us what you see on a daily basis while you're living there, surveillances, attacks on the houses, the resistance of the Sahrawi, which are sometimes very
passive, yes,
and non-violent for 30 years. And
I understand that. Yes, it was definitely non-violent.
And you have one experience that I found very interesting with a young boy, which I think
yes, I told you about that. Yes,
it shows how children are afraid of the Moroccan authorities on one hand, but on the other hand, also what they're taught at home. If you could tell us about this episode, please.
Well, actually, I mean, the son of someone I knew very well, because he worked as a driver for an American couple who had been there for 40 years. That is not part of the story. He had told me, and he was not an activist at all, but he had told me that while he was in school there, police would come, take one of his classmates and take him away. That is pretty scary. But yes, I told you about an incident. I was driving. I was going home after a day's work, so my own free time. And I was about to cross a main avenue all the rest on the other side was residential, a huge residential Sahrawi neighborhood, very poor, as you can see from the pictures I put on Twitter. There was a gas station there, petrol station, and there were like 20 people sort of hanging out. I have covered many demonstrations in Chile under the Pinochet years. So people sort of hanging out, looking everywhere. They are not hanging out for socializing. Something was happening. So as I was in a vehicle, I thought, okay, let me see what happens, and I will take some gas at this station and look around. And sure enough, within minutes, these people, these Sahrawi people, started to sort of melt away. Okay, let's see. There was a small street in diagonal there that just passed right in front of the gas station where I was inside my car. And first of all, I saw at least maybe a dozen Moroccan police people come out of that neighborhood straight to this big avenue, running, like, with all respect, due respect, like bats out of hell. They could not have run faster. And following that, 2 or 3 Moroccan police vans coming out of that same small street, rushing out like that. So I said, well, I was a former reporter. It's my free time. Let me see what's going on. So I entered the street very, very slowly. It was strewn with rocks of all sizes, some of them quite big. So I said, okay, something happened here. Let me just go slowly and get out, because it was only a block or two that had happened. So I stopped maybe a bit. I had my window open. I was driving to look around. And the small boy, Sahrawi boy, came running up. He was maybe 12. He was not an adolescent yet. So my car window there, he came up to there. And he had 2 rocks in hand, like this, 2 big rocks, which obviously would have been a threat. And I looked at him, he looked at me, and split seconds, he realized that I was not a threat. Not to them, not to the other side, not to anyone, not to anyone. And he reacted, and this was the amazing part. I was absolutely stunned. He reacted in the best possible way to show me that he was not a threat to me either. So, as I was saying, he had these 2 rocks. He was inches away from me. And to reassure me that he was not a threat, he did this theatrical gesture on his own. There was no adult behind him or anything. He put his hands downwards, palm downwards, and he let the stones fall to the ground. This is absolutely crying out, I am not a threat, I will not harm you. Because I wasn't. I was not his enemy, I was not anybody's enemy. And with a big smile, he made this gesture, which will remind any older American, like Nixon, but this for the Sahrawis means we want independence and we want to win. Completely, I mean, that was, hey, I'm Sahrawi, we want independence. But the other gesture was just amazing. I mean, this was a very intelligent way of telling me, of reassuring me that they would not harm me. So I've never forgotten that incident or what that little boy decided to do on his own in split seconds. And of course, I kept on driving after that. I think I nodded to him, acknowledging that, thank you for not harming me. And then I just went on and went home, because that's where I was going, in my apartment that I had rented in the middle of the city.
So all this was around the time of Music, before and after. And during the days of Music, the MINURSO staff passed the Music camp several times per day, I think, even. And everybody was very peaceful, protesting in Music. As you told me, there were thousands of white tents. It was a very beautiful image. It was after destroyed by the Moroccan authorities. Do you think that during the Music camp and now also, because it was a situation that was very violent and everybody knew about it, there was some danger, you were told to stay at home. Should the international community, being aware that there was this real danger and that these people were completely surrounded by Moroccan authorities and there were whole entire families in there, do you think the international community should have been more active?
Well, it's not for me to say about the international community. That's a big question. I will answer one question that has come up a lot and which relates to MINURSO, but I can certainly say that it has often been suggested, proposed, actively proposed, that the mission for Western Sahara, for the referendum in Western Sahara, which is MINURSO, should have a human rights mandate. Now, it does not have one. Why? Because it's an old mission. The story of Western Sahara starts decades before. There were some UN missions around, but at the time when MINURSO was created, like all peacekeeping missions, it was created by the UN, United Nations Security Council, which creates the mission, gives it its mandate, and can modify the mandate and close the mission. Obviously, it's their prerogative. So that is the reason why MINURSO at the start did not have a human rights mandate, because at the time, no mission had it. It was only then, afterwards, years afterwards, that the UN, the Security Council, started creating missions that had a lot more civilian functions, if I can say it that way. And it was not within our mandate. Our core mandate, and I'm speaking as an ex-MINURSO person here when I say we, MINURSO's core mandate was to organize a referendum for the people of Western Sahara. Why? Because it was their right, according to self-determination, which was a right accorded to colonies and colonial peoples, which Western Sahara certainly was, the right to decide via a referendum whether they want to be part of Spain, which was the colonial power, or they wanted independence. And that was MINURSO's core mandate. There was no mandate, as I've said, of human rights, to monitor human rights. And in particular, I am not a human rights officer. I was a political officer. We write the reports on political developments, what the UN headquarters needs to know. It is a well-defined job, and I was very happy to be a political officer as an ex-reporter, because this is what journalists do. We write up what we see as accurate as possible. I'm very proud of those years that I was there, and as a political officer for the UN. As I said, 15 in total, around 8 or 9 in Western Sahara as part of MINURSO, in both Layoun and having a look at the camps, refugee camps, Sahrawi refugee camps in and around the city of Tindouf, thanks to Algeria, which opened its borders during the war.
So now we have the end of the ceasefire, and the situation is completely different on the ground. MINURSO is still there, you're not a part of MINURSO anymore. The violations, the human rights violations that have been reported in the recent weeks are horrifying, because as we know, children and youth are particularly targeted to intimidate their families. Several reports have already been sent to the UN. And in this particular moment, human rights protection would be even more necessary. You told us that the MINURSO does not have the mandate for the human rights, but it was proposed several times, and it was demanded several times by several, not only by Polisario Front themselves, but also by several UN members. But Security Council never included it in its mandate. Do you think this will change now that the ceasefire ended, that there is some opening, in your opinion, to include a human rights mechanism?
Well, it's for the Security Council to say. If MINURSO is on the ground, it's because the Security Council of the United Nations has not told it to go anywhere, so they would not just get up and leave. The Security Council, as I think I said at the beginning, they create missions, they terminate missions, and it is certainly up to them. What is happening on the ground? Well, I think you can conclude by what I saw years ago, the same day that they destroyed the tents of Gdemizik. And you can see if a police force is capable of being about to throw stones at a Sahrawi residential house, they certainly can go way beyond the violence that you are describing. So that would be my answer, really. They can certainly do that. I retired 4 years ago. I am not on the ground. I have no reason to disbelieve this. And of course, you are right. Many, many NGOs support the people of Western Sahara. They do so because they have pursued peaceful means all these years to achieve their objective. And between brackets, I can say one thing. I remember when I was there, I obviously had interaction with the NGOs because we were there to liaise with Frente Polisario, and they always stop by and have a chat with us. And I remember very well an American NGO who was there, who would travel to third world countries, if I may, can be allowed that expression, to teach them about the value of education. And the head of that group told me personally, well, this is the only place, referring to the Sahrawi refugee camps, the only place where we have realized we have no need to tell them about education. They know it very well, and the degree of literacy in the camps, Sahrawis teaching their children, was very, very high, much higher than in Morocco, much higher than in Algeria. So they understood this. They educate their people. They are well organized, all organized under Polisario, which in fact has always had, most of the time, I don't know, they themselves distributed the food because they were trusted to do that. People did not steal food. So I have no problem in confirming, I think I can do that, that all protests were peaceful. And I would certainly be in favor of the situation calming down. I do not know what has happened militarily, but there have been lots of news about that in the Sahrawi Press Service, which is the Frente Polisario's website. Again, I cannot say anything because I am not there.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jonhs. I don't know if you want to add something and to leave some kind of message to our viewers.
I hope all goes well with them. They earned my respect. I'm also quite proud of the fact that at UN headquarters, I was never accused of being biased one way or the other. I was there as a UN International Civil Service. I was part of MINURSO, of the office that works directly with the head of the mission. I was never accused of being biased. And I am proud of my work at the UN, and particularly of my years as a political affairs officer. And as I got to know these people quite well in all that time, I've drunken quite a few glasses of Sahrawi tea, which, by the way, I can assure you it is very good, very strong tea and lots of sugar. It's delightful. But just to say that I interacted with the population, I saw it as part of my job. I realized they were interesting, and frankly, I wish them well. As an individual, I wish them well. Where that will go, the end of the ceasefire, which they respected all these years, I don't know. And by the way, when the mission was formed, and the African Union and the UN worked on that, okay, the two parties, Morocco, which is a state member, and Polisario, recognized as representing the Sahrawi people by the UN, they both agreed to two things: to do the referendum and to respect the ceasefire. Morocco has since gone back on that agreement, and now all it wants is a solution that favors the integration of Western Sahara, despite the protest of the local population, as part of Morocco. In the last few years I was there, they had no problem in referring to Western Sahara as Morocco's southern provinces. I'm sorry, but you do not take over a huge land like Western Sahara, which is approximately the size of New Zealand, by the way. Few people know about it because Morocco, it was not in their interest, and I say that is my opinion, to let people know about what they had done, their invasion, their taking over this place, this large territory, and they want it as their own. They are still looking for legitimacy to that claim. But let's not forget the International Court said they can have no claim to territorial sovereignty. Their occupation is not legitimate. And all these years they have been trying to make it legitimate, but their occupation is illegal. There is no going around that. If you know a little bit about international law and the UN Charter, yes, you will know that to invade a country is not legitimate. Even if Spain left the country, Spain was the colonizer, it left the colony to permit Morocco and Mauritania, by the way, but Mauritania left soon. It could be said, I think I've said it many times, it gifted that territory, people included, to the neighboring countries. I'm sorry, this goes against everything the UN stands for. And they did not negotiate it. They went in very violently. So, as I said, I cannot say what the UN should do. My goodness, it is absolutely not my job. The international community perhaps should pay more attention. And on a very personal level, I wish these people well.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
My pleasure. Thank you, Isabel.